The 14th Amendment functions as a rigid, mechanical override of the original United States constitutional system's foundational architecture. Prior to the Civil War, the constitutional baseline rested on state sovereignty. State governments held ultimate authority over their citizens' rights, operating without federal constraints. The 1833 case of Barron v. Baltimore turned this systemic vulnerability into confirmed legal precedent. The Supreme Court ruled that the Bill of Rights explicitly restrained only the federal government, leaving state governments free to treat their residents according to their own internal rules. This structural flaw reached its breaking point in 1857. Because states retained sovereignty over civil rights, the judiciary could arbitrarily deny basic legal standing to entire populations. In Dred Scott v. Sanford, the Supreme Court declared African Americans incapable of holding U.S. citizenship. Overhauling these systemic vulnerabilities required a new legal algorithm to force state compliance. That solution was the 14th Amendment. The first operational protocol of the 14th Amendment was establishing a permanent, unalterable definition of an American citizen. This is the handwritten text of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. Its ratification immediately nullified the Dred Scott ruling. The text creates an objective logic gate. Citizenship now requires exactly two inputs: being born or naturalized in the United States and being subject to U.S. jurisdiction. If both inputs are met, citizenship is guaranteed. The jurisdiction variable excludes specific exceptions, such as foreign diplomats born on U.S. soil. Because they are legally subject to their home countries, the system rejects their citizenship claim. For decades after 1868, Native American populations remained outside this logic gate, creating a significant loophole in the amendment's initial reach. The 1887 Dawes Act attempted to address this with a conditional offer. It granted citizenship only if individual Native Americans agreed to leave their cultures, accept individual land allotments, and abandon their traditional ways. This exclusion ended in 1924. The Indian Citizenship Act mandated the blanket inclusion of all Native Americans born within the United States. By anchoring status to geography and jurisdiction, the Citizenship Clause replaced arbitrary state prejudice with a permanent, objective baseline. The amendment's second pillar is due process, the primary legal shield against a state depriving a citizen of life, liberty, or property. Due process functions as a dual-layered algorithm that judges use to evaluate state actions. This chart divides the concept into two distinct legal tests: procedural due process on the left and substantive due process on the right. Procedural due process focuses on the mechanical fairness of enforcement. It ensures that whenever a state enforces a law, it follows set, non-arbitrary rules. This ensures fundamental trial mechanics, like the right to counsel and cross-examination, remain uniform across every state. Substantive due process asks a more fundamental question: is the government action or law itself inherently fair? This test protects fundamental rights, like the freedom of speech, the right to marry, and the right to travel. To infringe on these rights, a state must meet a high threshold by proving it has a compelling state interest. For example, the right to vote is a fundamental right. However, states can impose residency and registration requirements because the courts recognize the prevention of voter fraud as a compelling state interest. This engine protects citizens by policing both the execution of laws and the inherent fairness of legislation itself. The Equal Protection Clause introduces a specific constraint. While governments must categorize citizens to function, such as setting a minimum driving age, they cannot do so unreasonably. The Supreme Court measures this reasonableness through a three-tiered diagnostic tool known as the scrutiny matrix. The bottom tier is rational basis. It applies to most laws and requires only a logical connection between the state's classification and the law's purpose. State minimum age requirements for marriage fall here. The law discriminates against younger citizens, but it serves the logical goal of ensuring participants can handle the responsibilities of marriage. The middle tier, substantial relationship, applies to gender discrimination. It requires the law to serve an important government purpose and maintain a close connection to that goal. The highest tier is strict scrutiny. This is triggered by laws targeting race or national origin. The court presumes these laws are unconstitutional unless the state proves they serve a very important, compelling interest. The definitive test for this tier came in 1967 with the case of Loving v. Virginia. Mildred and Richard Loving challenged a Virginia law that prohibited marriage between people of different races. The Supreme Court unanimously overturned the law. Virginia's racial classification served no compelling state interest, failing the strict scrutiny test. This matrix forces states to provide a rigorous justification for discrimination, making it nearly impossible to legally target marginalized groups. Even after the 14th Amendment was ratified, the Supreme Court initially maintained that the Bill of Rights did not apply to state governments. This obstacle was cleared by selective incorporation. This doctrine uses the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause to systematically pull federal rights into state jurisdictions. Before the courts adopted this path, lawmakers tried a legislative approach with the 1875 Blaine Amendment. It attempted to apply a single part of the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment's ban on religious establishment, to the states. While the federal amendment failed, 36 states adopted their own versions, providing an early, narrow model for linking federal standards to state law. The judicial shift began in 1925 with Gitlow v. New York. The court ruled that free speech was a liberty that states could not deny without due process. In 1937, the Palco Standard established that federal rights would only be incorporated if they were essential to order, liberty, and justice. This standard meant the Bill of Rights would be ported over on a case-by-case basis, rather than all at once. Today, nearly the entire Bill of Rights has been incorporated through this process. The 2010 McDonald decision used this mechanism to pull the Second Amendment right to bear arms into state jurisdiction. Only 3 original rights remain unincorporated today, including the Fifth Amendment right to a grand jury. Selective incorporation functioned as a century-long funnel, dismantling state autonomy over fundamental human rights. The 14th Amendment serves as the comprehensive operating system of modern American civil rights. It fixed the systemic vulnerabilities exposed by Dred Scott by installing an unalterable baseline for citizenship. It deployed the due process logic gates to monitor the fairness of every state law. It engineered the scrutiny matrix and selective incorporation to bring state legislation under direct federal oversight. The ongoing application of this amendment continues to define the mechanical boundaries of American liberty and federalism today.